Hello, everyone. My name's Ian, and today I'm going to talk about this recent pencil illustration of mine, Steampunk Scientist. This is a piece I did in collaboration with one of my models, Zoe. We've done several different pieces together in the past, many of which you can see here. One that really stands out for me is this particular piece, where she's seated. She's a glass robot being seated behind a Texas Instruments TI-99 4A from the early 80s. Um, with this particular design in composition, I was wanting to do a kind of a goth styled steampunk piece based on this digital sketch that I did. This was done on my tablet, my Samsung Galaxy Tab 10 FE, using Ibis Paint X, just to come up with the basic concept for it. One of the changes I knew I wanted to make, however, is I realized that that coffin had to be inhabited. Otherwise, it kind of looked like she was coming out of the coffin. There was a question as to whether or not she was actually a vampire, and I thought, I think I wanted her a bit more of a monster hunter than an actual monster. The layout here that I'm doing on the Strathmore Bristol paper, 11 inch by 17 inch, 100-pound weight, smooth finish, which is my normal size and paper style. It's being done on with a 2H pencil. Usually in my previous pencil illustration videos, I don't really show too much of the initial layout of the 2H portion because it really doesn't get picked up very well. But this one did. I'm quite happy with how much of it could actually be picked up with the camera. But I always start with that basic 2H. It's very easy that way to make any changes. I don't tend to do a lot of erasing, but if I just want to change something, I'll just draw over it a little bit darker. And then going to the actual finished illustration portion, here I'm using an HB pencil. It's actually a mechanical pencil with a 0.7 millimeter lead in it, using it as a HB, using HB leads in it. Most of the time when you have a mechanical pencil, it's actually 0.5. I believe I said it was 0.7 for this. Yeah. Um, Normally there's 0.5. That's the usual ones you can pick up, but I'm using a 0.7 because it actually makes the pencil lines a little bit darker. It's a little bit softer than an HB from a smaller, from a finer pencil, and I find that that's good enough for a lot of cases, as long as I then touch it up later with a different weight of pencil. Although in this instance, I'm actually going to be doing something a bit different than that. Um, Basically, my plan had been the entire background, everything around the main character, and even the things in front of the main character, would be done using this particular HB pencil, which does create a really nice dark line. Everything, it actually reproduces very well, but visible from easily from across the room. But because I'm wanting everything to focus on the main character, just like in all my digital pieces and all my painting pieces, all my inked pieces, the way that I'm going to be enhancing the focus on the main character is that everything done at this stage with the main character will be done with a heavier pencil. So she'll actually jump out of the page a little bit more. Not so much that she doesn't look like she's part of the setting, but everything about her will be a little bit higher contrast. I'm also going to be doing a different thing with her skin tone that I've done in many of my previous pencil illustration videos. But here, actually adding in that coffin, and you can see already that there is this corpse type thing sitting in the coffin, wearing robes with Lovecraftian style tentacles coming out of it. That's going to be a theme in this entire over this entire illustration. You can see that the setting for this is some sort of scientific lab, specifically with a bit of a Victorian era bent, a late 1800s London, England kind of a look. The shelves behind glass filled with books and beakers and various jars. One of the techniques for doing that, actually, for having items behind glass to give it an effect that it looks like it's behind glass, is leaving a bit of a white halo around the edge of the glass where it meets the wooden frame around it. It gives you a sense of light warping a little bit as it gets to the edge of the glass. That does a really good job of conveying that that is a sheet of glass and all the elements are behind it. There'll be another major uh, focal point in this illustration doing the same thing with a much more specific image, which we'll get to later on. And right down, laying down these wooden slats in the background behind the coffin. And unlike a lot of the other images I've worked on, unlike a lot of the other videos I've been talking about, I'm not actually doing this one back to front, although I am starting from the deepest background here. But instead, I'm drawing this one from left to right. And frankly, the practical reason for doing that is being right-handed. If I had started from the right-hand side of the screen of the page, and then gradually moved to the left, I would then be running the risk of smearing all of that pencil work that I had done with the side of my hand. Um, so for purely practical reasons, I'm starting from the left-hand side and moving to the right. Now, I could have been spinning the board the whole time. I actually have this sheet of paper taped down onto a wooden board to make it easier to work with, so it always lays flat. It doesn't ever start to curl. But when possible, I tend to leave it in the same position through most of the drawing process. I will spin it a bit, and we'll see a few times where I do turn it around. But I could have been spinning it the whole time and just gradually working from the outside in or working from the inside out. But the method I tend to prefer using is just when doing something like this, when I'm working with very soft leads, when I'm working with easily destroyable media, I'll just work from the left to the right. With something like the ink illustrations I've done, um, it's not such a big problem. I can do my normal process of working from back to front because you can give enough time between the various stages to let the ink dry completely. No option here. Um, Basically, once these pencil lines are down, I don't want it to change whatsoever. So much so that I know a lot of people, when they're doing pencil illustrations, will apply a fixative later. I don't. I just immediately, once I've scanned it, I immediately put it um, in a protective container so that it won't smear, that it won't get damaged. The downside to a lot of fixatives is that they can actually start to react with the paper and start to yellow the paper over time. Um, Now, mostly I get that from my, oh gosh, this is going way back to when I was working in an art store in the late 80s. Um, that was something we had to worry about back then, about recommending or not recommending fixative sprays. That technology may have changed, it may have advanced since the late 80s. I haven't looked into it too much. I've been pretty happy with the procedures I came up with back then. So now we're moving further along to the right of the page, continuing this elaborate machinery and this laboratory behind the Steampunk Scientist character, including electrical coils and other testing devices. Um, Directly behind her, there's this circular thing that's it, basically a transmitter of some sort, but then I added in a lot of almost cobwebby style details to it, indicating there's been some distress going on with it. Sitting on top of what would probably be an electrical generator, um, almost like there's a very old style radio sitting underneath it, with, of course, tentacles and various spooky bits working, interacting with everything. This is basically my first October illustration of 2025. I do tend to like to do a lot of horror-based pieces in the fall. Now we're getting into the even deeper background, basically just the flat the flat wooden walls, but I'm adding a bit of extra texture to it as though they've been distressed, as though they've been water damaged, anything to give it a little bit more visual interest. I didn't want to go with a more cold or sterile, modern day laboratory kind of a look. Um, and even real world laboratories at this time would have a little bit, it would be a little bit cleaner than what I'm doing, especially when you get to the floor. There'd be a big difference between what I'm doing and what would be in a lot of actual scientist labs in the Victorian era. So now I've switched over to using the 4B pencil because I'm starting to work on the steampunk scientist herself and her cybernetic arm. Now, uh, incorporating cybernetics into one of my illustrations is nothing new. I do that all the time. It's one of the things I really enjoy working on. This one is a lot clunkier. The idea is it would have a lot of brass fittings, a lot of raised pieces. Again, going with the more steampunk kind of a feel. So, um, but there's a little bit more contrast within this figure than there is in the background. The background, while it has a lot of detail, a lot of individual items that will jump out when you look at them, if you look at the background quickly, it turns fairly gray in an effort to push the focus more on the main character. Always talking about how everything in my illustrations is always meant to draw the eye and push the focus towards the main story. And generally that means the main character or characters. And one of the ways I'm doing that here is with this fairly uniform gray in the background using the softer HB pencil, but using this 4B pencil on the main character is the quality of the pencil lines changes quite a bit. It's much darker, much stronger pencil lines on the main character as opposed to the background. But also there's going to be more white space in the main character. So that'll actually provide even more contrast. The blacks will get blacker, the whites will get whiter. And right now, doing the details on the face, this is where I'm doing a fairly major departure from a lot of my other pencil illustrations that I've been posting as part of this series, or from the previous series that are on here. I'm not putting in a lot of detail on the skin tones. I'm actually leaving that fairly wide open. If I was doing it as inks, it's because I would then be doing all the texture work, all the indications of light source and such in the painting. If I was doing an inks to digital colors. But with this one, this is just being, the intent of this is to be leaving it black and white. And I want to leave the skin tones fairly undetailed to add to that contrast, to make her jump out of the frame even more. Now, the model is actually very pale, so that worked really well. But it serves a lot to pull the main character forward in the frame, even though there will be elements in the illustration that are physically in front of her, that will be between the viewer and her. It still helps to put the main focus on her between the very, very dark black shadows and the very bright white highlights on her. And as the whole piece progresses and the background uniformity, the gray uniformity in the background continues, there is still variation in that gray, and there's still a bunch of extra details. Clearly, the deeper shadows behind those cabinets on the far left-hand side of the image, well, left of frame, are a bit darker than the wall that's behind some of the other machinery. So there's still depth. There's a feeling of texture within this setting. It's not just completely flat, but if you were to blur your eyes, if you were to squint your eyes a little bit and everything got a bit blurry, the background would flatten and she would pop out even more. And that's what the sense I'm wanting to go with here. But the more you look at the image, the more all these little details pop out, the more you'll see all these extra things going on, including a ton of extra little details everywhere. Continuing on working on the boots here. I'm doing the same pattern of light and shadow on the boots as I did on the corset, on the rest of her outfit. Very deep shadows, but actually going to white for certain highlights, providing that extra amount of contrast within the figure. Everywhere in the background, Very little in the background ever goes to white. Pretty much just the haloing around some glass effects. But even that is so subtle that it won't really jump out all that much. This second boot here, like her left boot, from her perspective, her left boot that I'm detailing right now, will actually have very little detail in it. You can see right here that I'm almost completely blacking it out. I'm putting in almost no little elements. You can't, while the little crosses on the side of the boot would be there, they're actually on the other side from the viewer. But there are banding and there would be banding and things like that you would be able to see. But that's actually going to be in deeper shadow because of her dress. Basically, the way the light would be falling on it is her left leg would fall almost completely in shadow because of the heavy skirt that she's wearing. So that helps to separate the two legs, the two boots, from each other. It adds an extra layer of depth to the character. Not only is she just a character with a very particular black and white high contrast design, but she's still a three-dimensional character. So when elements of her go behind something and be blocking the light source, with regard to the basically leather outfit, the dark outfit that she's wearing, those parts would get even darker. You'd be seeing less detail. Still leaving a little rim of white on both the front and back of that leg, because it will be picking up light bouncing around the environment. But I didn't want to have any additional detail. I didn't want to put in the details of the banding on the side of the legs, on the side of those boots. So continuing into the background, detailing the coffin lid. And so again, if you compare this to the original digital sketch I did where the coffin was empty, it looked very much like she had just come out of that. Whereas here, it looks like she's just dealt with whatever is in the coffin. And the thing I was talking about that was very different from what a lot of Victorian era laboratories would be is I gave this a wooden floor. Those wooden slats on the floor. Most of the references I found, they tend to be concrete floors, tend to be very flat floors. Basically the kind of floors that would be very easy to clean up. But I wanted something with more texture. And ultimately, slats of wood work really well for that. I could have made it a very pitted concrete floor. It would have been very stained, very beat up. But when I put in the wooden slats on the back wall, they were not actually in the back wall, they were on a back cabinet that the coffin was leaning against. I realized I really liked that look. So I thought I would carry it through into the floor as well. Plus, the wooden slats convey a nice sense of depth. It's giving me some perspective lines in there, draws the eye from the left-hand side of the frame towards the main character, but also gives you a sense of the shape of the room a bit more than just a flat concrete floor would have. Now we're getting into some of the foreground elements, still dealing with the fact that I'm basically drawing this from left to right. And now we've got these foreground tentacles, these foreground horror elements that she's been dealing with this crazy steampunk style gun that she's carrying. In the original photo, she was actually carrying a prop crossbow. I believe it was a prop. It was based on the crossbow used in The Walking Dead that had been given to me one year for a birthday present. So using that rough shape, I built this more steampunky looking ether style gun. It wouldn't be firing projectiles. Instead, it would just be sort of launching lightning or launching ether attacks, something in that whole steampunk vein. And progressing down to her hand. The prop originally was about the same length as the design I came up with here. So, and the same overall width, or her hand pattern, like the way she was holding the gun, matched really well with what I wanted to do on this particular weapon. Adding in a lot of details about some sort of high pressure chamber inside this weapon and the long stock and various things, but all that also being done with the 4H pencil or the 4B pencil. So you can see here I switched back to the 4B pencil. At this point, the main character is completed. Pretty much everything I wanted to do on her is now done. She already stands out from the grayer background. And I switch back to using my HB pencil, a silver mechanical pencil, and continuing the deep background behind this glass tube. It's always fun working with a glass tube in a steampunk style environment. I've done this a few times. You can see some of them on my Blue Sky page, linked below. Not all of that would have been on my Instagram or Threads pages. But the Blue Sky tends to be where I put the most material up, but also where I put all my work in progress images. I'll put some of them on the Instagram stories as well, but Instagram and Threads just tend to be for the final product. Honestly, the best way for interacting with me or seeing more process-based stuff is taking a look at the link to my Blue Sky account below. And the whole point for me of doing this glass tube is to basically put a brain in a jar. A very standard steampunk image. Added in 2 eyes on tendrils coming off of it, plus the whole thing surrounded by, again, a whole pile of tentacles. Just continuing the horror vibe. It's a bit of a cheeky horror, not quite a full-on campy horror, but there is a sense of humor to the whole piece. And again, I'm doing that bit where the interior of that tube doesn't quite go to the edge of it. So I'm leaving this halo around it to give it the sense that this is curved glass. So there's plenty of white space in there, but not as much as there is in the main character. And so between the lessening of the amount of white space and the fact that it was all done with basically a lighter pencil, using an HB pencil, pushes it back a little bit behind the main character. It's still an interesting focus in the illustration, but it's very clear that is not the primary focus of the illustration. And then continuing into the machinery that is housing and probably keeping alive whatever is in that tube. Adding in more brass fittings, a variety of little almost speaker grills and things like that. Now we're continuing onto the floor in front of, right below the main character. Continuing this wooden slat pattern. These long, the slats are even in parallel lines. Excuse me. But I didn't want them to have been laid down exactly the same way. I wanted to be a little bit more visual interest. Kind of like how I've talked a few times about absolutely loving drawing brick walls, that it's always an overlapping pattern. So I'm doing a roughly overlapping pattern with these wooden slats, just to give it a touch more visual interest, kind of warping them a little bit. They're very aged. They've probably been stained over the years. And then now getting into the final foreground elements, the remaining tentacles that are floating around in front of the main character. This is all between the main character and the viewer. But because they're not done as dark as the main character, because I'm still just using the HB pencil, it serves more to frame her than it does to draw attention to itself. It is still setting up a sense of depth to the overall piece. The tentacles still look like they're in front of the main character. So they're adding to the sense of space within this room, but they're not... it's very clear that that's not what the story is about. The story's, whatever the focus of this story is, it's about that main character and her individual reactions to everything else in the room. She probably doesn't think any more of any one element than any other. And here is the final completed version. So thank you very much for hanging out and watching this, and I hope to see you in the next video.